Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective, and this is my co-host and head practitioner, Shannon Callery. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So today we're going to be kind of talking about two different topics, but kind of the same in certain ways here. And we've done kind of some more technical episodes on, like hormones and things like that. But, Shannon and I are both in our 30s. I got a couple years on her, but we're both in our 30s and, preparing for two kind of different stages of our life. Shannon wants a family. I'm already thinking about perimenopause and menopause. And so we wanted to just kind of share some things that we're doing in our lives to prepare ourselves for kind of the next phase in our life and in our journey, personal journeys.
Yes. Yeah. And it's, even though these are two different things that we're preparing for, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about is actually going to be quite similar in what we're doing to prepare and how we're doing it. So yeah, I think in general, this is really going to be just a great episode, overall, mostly, talking about menopause, getting pregnant and whatnot, for females. There's going to be a lot of tips here, but I'm also going to try and add in a couple things that my partner is doing as well to help prepare for a family, because that side is also very important.
Super important and so often forgotten or ignored or neglected. And so, yeah, I'm super excited that you're going to share some of that side too, because I also think, for anyone who wants to start a family, obviously it takes two to create a child and create life. And I also think I just talked to someone earlier today, so this is super on my mind of just, women get pregnant, whether it's their first, second, third, more than that, and they're not really prepared. And we can end up with a lot of side effects coming postpartum and everything like that, or a lot of challenges in conceiving. So yeah, I'm super excited to dive into all of this.
Yeah. Do you want me to start off and get the ball rolling?
That'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, so just to preface this a little bit, when, females are trying to get pregnant and trying to start a family, it's super common that it's just the female that is only doing the work on her body, whether that's taking supplementation, exercise, movement, whatever that may be, even diet changes. And typically we don't hear the male doing much of any changes really for their body. And it is extremely important because, both sides matter here. There's so many parts, that I can't think of specifics right now. I just blanked on what I was going to say for specific things from the male that matter when trying to create a baby. So this has been a big deal for us. So I'll say just as a whole, the number one thing that we both agreed to do was get testing done and start there, seeing what are the deeper imbalances that are going on in the body. For both of us, we both had mold toxicity. It affected me way differently than it affected my partner, which is not uncommon for females and males. So of course that was something that we started to address, and it took time to address. For me, it probably took 1 to 2 years. For him, I would say 8 or 9 months it took to address. So it was a much different process. And then, of course, retesting, seeing what else is popping up, what other imbalances are going on. We both had some parasite stuff. We both had some heavy metal stuff that needed to be addressed. So that was really the basis of where we started with this. And we've been together for 6 years. So like these are things that, you know, we kind of started doing early. We had already talked. We knew we wanted to have a family, and we knew that this stuff needed to be addressed. So that was like a frontline thing that we did right off the bat. After we got all of that stuff that was happening in our body in a better place, liver support is one thing that we both really try and do. What, you know, we have the at-home Therasage sauna that we use, Epsom salt baths. I do castor oil packs and coffee enemas. It's super important to help support the liver just because that helps protect our body or process out so many toxins that we're just naturally exposed to on a daily basis. And one of those toxins being alcohol, you know, is a pretty big thing. So another thing that my partner is trying to do is we've definitely made adjustments with alcohol consumption. And I'm sure once it gets closer to us, like, you know, actively trying to have a child, that is a conversation that we will have again, like maybe even completely cutting out alcohol for a while, just because it is so hard on the liver.
Yeah, and let's talk about this testing piece a little bit more. And you know, I certainly fell into this category here of like, you know, sometimes in our 20s and plenty of people in their 30s and 40s plus as well, you know, don't get regular testing done. And I'm talking like yearly, annual physical, baseline metabolic panel, CBC with differential, lipid panel, maybe some thyroid markers, maybe some iron markers. Like, a lot of people aren't getting this done. And I'll tell you, no matter where you are landing on the spectrum right now, man, does that go a long way. In just being able to see patterns, being able to see improvements, or and look, like, and I know we shared this, I'm pretty sure on the blood testing episode, but we never expect perfect blood work, even from ourselves. And it's not, there's no judgment. We try and not have any judgment. Coming up for this, you and I have had conversations where both of our blood work has come back being like, son of a. So, yeah. So, you know, and using it as information and as tools of, okay, well, at this point in my life, like in this year, what is my body trying to tell me? What is it asking for? What is it needing? You know, all that stuff can go a really long way. And the more you can balance out your own body, the better off you're going to be trying to conceive, just healthier, preparing for menopause, you know, like, all of this stuff, because all of these things, when they're out of balance, are stressors. And if we think about stress as, you know, the ultimate root cause of dysfunction inside and outside of the body, I mean, that's such a huge piece. And the safer we can help our bodies feel, the easier of a time they're going to have going through really any sort of transition, whether that's stress or trying to conceive on either end, on going through menopause. So I think that's just really important. And I think the earlier you can start and start being really consistent with that, the better. You know, the other thing that I see a lot in Facebook groups, especially in a lot of my fitness groups, is like everyone should be on this supplement. If you're trying to conceive, this supplement. If you're having hot flashes through menopause, you should be on this supplement. If you're trying to build muscle, you should be on this supplement. Like, there is no everyone should be on this supplement. You know, like, maybe you could argue magnesium, but I've seen plenty of people who don't need magnesium. You know, you could argue creatine if you're trying to build muscle. Yes, there are a lot of benefits. No, I also don't think everyone needs that either. And I think it's so bio-individual that the value of testing, just baseline testing, goes such a long way.
Yeah, it really does. And especially for some of these like nutrient markers. And that's something that, so we have these basic panels that Megan just kind of listed out that are a great like starting point for seeing what's going on, what's happening in the body. And then once you've kind of figured out what the bigger imbalances are and you've been able to address them, there's more specific testing that you can get done. Like, we have a great like thyroid panel with, you know, tons of different markers to make sure you know, it's not perfect, again, which we've talked about. Testing is not perfect, but it does give us a good snapshot on like, okay, hey, we've done all this baseline work. What are our hormones looking like? How are we feeling? What are the markers looking like? And that's also a really great thing to add in further down the line, like when you're trying to conceive, or even for preparing for menopause. We could say that as well. That type of testing. And we have like a nutrient panel that goes over, what do all these nutrient markers look like? Is there anything out of whack there? Because that's also really important. And it's not uncommon to have different nutrient deficiencies sometimes that don't naturally correct themselves when we've had bigger issues going on, like mold. Sometimes we do have to go in and do target specific nutrients and get things balanced out. So yeah, when it comes to the testing, there's tons of different ways that you can use this, and the timing of it is important as well. I do think doing more hormone testing, doing like the nutrient panel, those would be great options if you have done some of the deeper work to kind of help balance things out.
Yeah, I'll also throw in there like the HTMA. If we think about, when it comes to pregnancy, pregnancy, a lot of it is about minerals. And so many minerals are depleted when we get pregnant and even postpartum through breastfeeding, if that's what you choose to do. And then if we look at menopause too, we look at the adrenal piece, and there's so many issues for so many women coming up around menopause. And that's honestly, that's largely why most women have such a hard time going through menopause, is poor little adrenals have been stressed for their entire lives. And then now they're taking on a whole other big job of trying to take over hormone production and balancing largely. And they can't keep up. And so, once again, like this is where like some of the finer tuning can come into play, where if we've done a lot of the bigger work, and you and I have both done a lot of bigger work that, we largely don't have to do, these really intense protocol, largely, these bigger things. And so I think that's really important of like, I think there's the, bigger picture, like bigger stressors, what is really going on. And then once those have been addressed, okay, how do we really optimize the body, and what does that look like? And once again, like there's no such thing as perfect blood work. There's no such thing as any perfect lab that I've ever seen. And so just keeping that in mind and giving yourself more feedback and information. And I'll tell you, like, for me, I'm 35 right now. And, probably starting, my hormones are largely in a really good spot. My periods are super regular. Largely, they're like no big deal. Largely, stress, every once in a while thrown in there just throws me for a little bit of a loop. But by and large, my, hormones are pretty good. And so probably around like 38, 40, I'll probably start getting a Dutch test run once a year, once every other year. Like that's already in my mind to... Once again, it's just like this optimization of course, I'm going to run blood work because I like to run blood work on myself every 6 to 12 months anyways. And then what is another layer to make sure I'm further optimizing, supporting my body so that when this stressful quote unquote stressful transition, it doesn't have to be that stressful if your body is set up for it. What does this really look like, and how can we make sure that our body's in the best position? Once again, growing a baby, like, man, that's a lot of work on your body. Like, it's a lot of mineral depletion, especially among many other things. And so, just once again, the better we can set ourselves up for this, the less challenges we are less likely to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not only talking about like internal stressors or imbalances here. I mean, lifestyle changes as far as stress is a huge part of this too, for both menopause and getting pregnant. And that is also something that we have been working on consistently, like, adding in daily mindfulness practices, releasing old traumas and emotions, and working on that side of things has also been a huge, huge part of this. And we have been living away from home for quite some time now, from where both of our family is. And that's like also something in the back of our heads. We know that we're going to need support to make it less stressful on us. So that is part of the reason why we want to transition back to living around all of our family and friends. I mean, I see it happen all the time. Like, you know, I have friends who have kids and it is very stressful. Like they work full-time jobs. They don't have extra time to take care of themselves. My one really great friend, she has 3 kids and she has high stress. She works full-time, maybe doesn't have like all the help that she should necessarily have. And she's the one who kind of gets the brunt of it. Like she skips meals throughout the day, maybe doesn't get enough water in, doesn't get enough rest. And those things take a toll on your body, and it's going to make it harder, you know, for any of this. Like if you wanted to have other kids, if you are going to go, you know, when you get to that time going through menopause, all of these things are considered stressors. So the stress piece is also a really big piece to this. And I also know that, you know, that's not the case for everyone. Not everyone is ready to dive into some of these bigger traumas, looking inward and seeing what comes up. But realistically, it is a big piece of this and is something that could be very helpful if you do choose to address it.
Yeah, and there's like 2 things I wanted to like elaborate on it, and I want to chat a little bit more about these because I think they're super important. You know, the first one, you know, talking about your friend, and I've seen this with my friends too, of like, are you skipping meals? Are you drinking enough water? Like, are you sleeping when you can? You know, like all of these things. And I think one of the most valuable things you can do before stepping into any sort of big life transition is have some habits already set up and very strongly in place, because they're less likely to go out the window when the stressful event, no matter what that is, and pregnancy and menopause are 2 really big ones, of like, you know, if you're already used to drinking and you know how good it feels to drink, you know, 80, 90 ounces of water a day, to, you know, eat the protein, to have breakfast within an hour of waking up. And it's not about being perfect. Of course that things are going to happen. Of course, you know, there's going to be a day at some point where you skip breakfast accidentally. You know, like things are just going to happen. And, you know, if you've already been consistent with these things for 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, how much easier is it going into some of these bigger transitions and or just stressful periods of time?
Yeah, absolutely. Once you have the habits in place, it does make it easier to go back to those original habits, like especially after you have a child or something, because it's something that your body is used to, and you know, you can feel that you need it and what it feels like when you don't do it or when you stop doing it. So yeah, that's a huge piece to this. And the sleep portion, so big for both of these topics here. I mean, sleep is so incredibly important, especially when it comes to hormones. And that is absolutely something that we have worked on, you know, over the last 2 years. I feel like in a pretty solid place with this now, but coming from a person who, you know, took sleeping medication for like 15 years, this is something that I worked really, really hard at, to have a good nighttime routine. And that is something that we both continue to work on, like no phones when we're in bed. Rob is currently working on that, the screen time thing, just like prioritizing good sleep any way you can. It's going to go a really long way.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other piece I wanted to just elaborate on, you know, we talked about this bigger work and deeper work. And, you know, here's the reality of the situation when we have a child is, especially specifically as women, although I do think the men obviously play a role here, but we can pass on a lot of things to our children. And that could be, you know, for women in particular, you know, when we have a vaginal birth, we're passing along our gut health to our child. So if your gut is in a rough spot and you have a child, they might have some gut issues too, because they're getting largely your gut health too. You know, same thing if like you go in with certain toxins, and this isn't to scare you. This is just like there's value if you have the chance to do some preparation work going into this. So, you know, so you can pass on like toxin levels and things like that. And generational trauma is a real thing. And, thinking about and diving deeper into this nervous system regulation piece and, like huge props to Rob for, for also like doing some of this work and, like just being aware of what you guys could pass on to your kids. And once again, it's not about being perfect. We're all going to traumatize our children. There's no question about it. I think there's levels here. But, like passing on big trauma patterns that, maybe have been in the family or have been very prevalent in our lives, like what does that really look like? And how do we want to parent different? How do we want to show up different? And that really starts with us, and ourselves and what's some of the work that we've done to try and limit, some of the bigger things that we could pass on.
Yeah. This is something that takes time, and, you can certainly start to do this in small ways at any time, really. Same thing for some of the bigger detoxing work, but I feel lucky that, this has been my lifestyle for so long. I've been very in touch with these things, so I've had this space to work on it because I knew I eventually wanted to have a family. And I know that might not be the case for everyone, but it doesn't mean that you can't add these things in at any time, because they will still go a long way. They can still, change your parenting habits if there's certain things that you don't like that you do, even if you have kids. Like, you can change all of this stuff. It's just when you choose to add it in.
Yeah. And I, specifically in the psychedelic space and all the healing work and group work that I've done in that space, well, most of these women, once again, are older, and have kids. And I really don't think, just hearing a lot of their conversations about, how they're parenting. And I've seen some of this firsthand with some of my friends. And, I have one friend in particular who I just like, there's so much awe and how she really, talks to her child and parents. And, I see her showing up for herself and then, translating that onto her child. And I'm like, man, and once again, like, she's not a perfect parent either. She readily admits that too. And once again, like, I can't even imagine, especially as someone who grew up with, like, I won't say not a great parent, but a very trauma-filled parent. I mean, like, man, like, she's teaching him how to like connect with his emotions and connect with his body. And he goes to like this yoga summer camp. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that sounds amazing. And he loves it. How just, teaching all of these skills and how to connect with yourself and feel and just, I mean, it's really like, man, I can't even imagine what it would be like growing up with that type of parent. And just once again, like, of course he's going to have trauma, the child's going to have some trauma, as we all do. Yeah. And, he's already going into this with so many tools because of the work that she's doing and has done. And, it really does make such a big difference. And it does not matter at what age you start this work at, that it still can go a long way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Props to her. That sounds like she's doing a great job. That's so awesome. And a cool thing about this type of work too, not all of it or every single part of it, but there is things that we can continue to do along the way. Like, I foresee myself utilizing energy clearing tools probably for the rest of my life. If there's any traumatic events that happen or stressful things that maybe I hold on to and kind of turn it into a traumatic event in my body, there's tools that we can use to process that and help, remove it, release it, and let it go along the way. And I also think like that's part of it too. We have to start with the deeper stuff. Usually that's what we see, is we got to clear out like the really deep stuff before we get to the more recent things. But yeah, this is really stuff that you can do just like all throughout your life to help you stay connected, to help you be a better parent, to help balance your hormones and your internal health, your stress load. This really is like a full circle thing here when we start to address our mental health, nervous system, trauma work.
Yeah. And we also, need to remember that, we all look up to our parents, especially as young children. That's our example of what it's like to live. And once again, and obviously I know that not everyone's going to be able to do this, but if we can set up some really good habits early, like, man, they're going to see those, they're going to watch those, they're going to have interest and intrigue. I've had clients before with, young kids, and they do their breathing exercises together. Like, yeah, how, like, that's just so cool. And just like, once again, like, I think back of like, if someone had taught me like how to manage stress through breathing, deep breathing through my belly, the value of, taking a few minutes out of your day to like just breathe into your body, like, man, super, super, super valuable. And once again, the younger, probably the younger that these kids are being able to see and experience that, it's going to stick with them for the rest of their lives. And how cool and how valuable is all of that?
Yeah. Yeah, this piece in particular is a really big deal to me, and it always has been, because, I love my parents. I think they're great, great parents. They, gave me everything that I could ever need and desire, but I was not taught how to regulate emotions. Therefore, I suppressed everything. I mean, I remember being angry when I was like 5 years old, like literally just angry all the time up until probably my early 20s, because I didn't understand how to process emotions. So like this specific thing is something that has always stuck out to me. Like, I want to do it differently. I want to heal some of that generational trauma and show my children how to regulate their emotions, because it just makes better human beings.
Yes. Yeah. And I, just kind of transitioning out of this piece, and looking at nutrition, and I think the nutritional piece is going to be pretty similar, in regards to like both of these kind of periods of times and transitions of, nutrition can go a long way. And once again, it's not about being perfect, and there's a lot of things that we can do. And once again, like, the safer our bodies feel inside and out, the further all of this work goes. And nutrition plays a really big role here. I know for me, like, once again, thinking about menopause, like, largely eating whole foods, that also just helps me feel better, my gut feel better, my brain feel better, energy levels, like all of that. For me, I know like staying away from gluten in particular is really important, because I know like I react so quickly and so strongly to gluten that it's not great for me and my body. That is not to say that is the case for everyone, but for me in particular, I have a very high level of sensitivity to that. And once again, especially if you're trying to get pregnant in your 30s, protein, we're already losing bone mass and muscle mass starting at 30. I was just in the hospital, not for me. And there on the screen, they have a little like, did you know that you start losing bone and muscle mass at 30? And I was so impressed. And they talked about protein intake. And I was like, look at Western medicine go. Now, that is about the only thing they did right. And, I'll take it. It's a small win, but it's a really big deal. And so, yeah, prioritizing that protein, just, man, if if I look at, one of the most common complaints that we get, coming like postpartum, and then in the transition to menopause is weight gain. And a lot of this has to do with our adrenals, and nutrition. It can play a big role here. And the more we can prioritize protein and making sure that we're getting adequate amounts of protein for our bodies, and this does look different, I'd say usually for most women, at least 100 grams a day is a good starting point. For me, I don't track anymore. I do measure out my protein at times, but I also tracked for so long that I'm pretty good at eyeballing and knowing about how much protein I'm getting in any given meal. And, like 140 to 160 is probably where I land most days. And man, does it make a big difference when I don't hit that, with blood sugar regulation, with food cravings. I was just thinking today, like, man, I don't have any food cravings anymore. And a lot of that goes into the gut, but a lot of that goes into protein intake. And once again, like one of the first things we hear when we start working with someone and we increase protein is like mood's better, energy's better, sleep is better, and cravings are way down. And so this protein piece goes such a long way.
Yeah, it really does for both of these things here. Just like trying to get in whole real foods, prioritizing protein, better quality protein if you have the option. Same thing with like the dairy, better quality dairy. It's going to be, like organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, raw if you have access to it. Just prioritizing really good quality food and staying away from or eating less of the packaged processed food, that's going to help all of this stuff, because when we are consuming some of the packaged and processed food, oftentimes we're naturally just going to be getting in like more chemicals, toxins, and then, we can go inside like the energy piece to it here. What's the energy around the food, especially when it comes to like meat and factory farming? Like if you have the option to get eggs from the person down the road, I would always recommend like doing that instead of buying them in a grocery store. Just like nutrition as a whole, trying to prioritize that is really going to help balance out hormones. And like Megan was saying, so many things here. It's going to help with blood sugar regulation, especially the protein piece, the sleeping, the less cravings. There's just so many benefits from adding in real food to your diet.
Yeah, and I know, we all get busy and it can be easier to grab, the packaged snack. And once again, it's not about being perfect here. And the whole foods, especially if you are concerned, so many women are concerned about weight and what they look like. And that's a whole trauma piece by itself too. And, like understanding people think like, oh, eating healthy is so expensive. Eating healthy packaged, quote unquote, healthier packaged food is really what's greatly more expensive. And not saying that, the price of eggs right now and, getting grass-fed meat, yes, of course, that's going to be more expensive, anyways. And, like to go from, potato chips, a bag of potato chips to, kettle baked, non-super processed potato chips, like, yeah, you're going to pay an extra several dollars. And we could also just, buy some potatoes, get less calories, get a whole, and I know timing's a factor here. And this is where, having planning, like meal prepping, meal planning, especially if you have, once again, habits, do you have this habit already of just like, spending a couple hours one day, making some bigger batch meals, or, like, hey, these are the days I'm cooking. These are the days I'm not cooking. And what does this look like? And how do I prep and make sure everything's taken care of? That stuff goes such a long way.
Yeah, it really does. And it also helps with just reducing your stress load, honestly, because not only do you have something like quick, ready to go, if you don't have a lot of time, if you are feeling tired, you're going to be way better off reaching for something that has a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat in it, as opposed to like a packaged granola bar. So just taking the time to do it. This is another thing, just like kind of falls in the, I'll do air quotes here, self-care category. I don't love calling it that, but if you can make time to take like an hour to meal prep, even if it's just like snacks throughout the week, if that's the one thing that you tend to reach for, packaged and processed foods, take a little bit of time, meal prep some snacks. It's going to be a huge shift, and you will probably save money as well.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the nutrition piece can go a really long way here. The other thing I was just thinking about too, and we, by the way, we do work with a lot of women trying to conceive, and also a lot of women either in full blood menopause or in the perimenopause uncomfortable state here. And so movement, let's talk about movement here. Like movement goes such a long way. And I know for me, like once again, like I've a history of being in a car accident with chronic pain issues, and I've been through so many physical therapists, and I didn't agree with, I fired all 8 of them. And, the strength training piece, the workout piece, like what does working out look like for you? What does movement look like for you? And look, like walking, great, amazing, so many benefits. And I'll tell you specifically, if you are thinking about menopause or you are, just in your 30s and you're done with kids and that's like the next phase of your life, like one of the best things you can do is start strength training literally today. And, like for me, I've been strength training now consistently. 12 years, I think. 2015 is when I became a personal trainer. So I am coming up on my 10-year anniversary of finishing my personal training certification and getting hired as a personal trainer. But I was strength training for several years very consistently before that. And, like I have a lot of flexibility now with my workouts. And once again, for me, working out is not about like, I'm trying to have 6-pack abs. Like I'm trying to look super buff, trying to compete. Like, no, I just like want to feel good, and feel healthy, in my body and, feel really good with that. And strength training, I strength train usually 2 to 3 times a week, kind of depending on the week now. I do shorter workouts than I used to. They're like 30 to 45 minutes versus like hour and 15. And I also, once again, like I have a lot of flexibility in my workouts now because I've been building muscle mass for so many years that my body, even if I took like a 3-week break, at some point over the last year, and I'll tell you, like my strength came back within 2 of restarting the gym, and my body like physically did not change very much. Like, and I, and there was a lot of stress during that period of time. I got sick during that period of time, and my body really didn't change much. And a lot of that goes to the baseline muscle mass that I've already built. And, as I like really start to get to like probably close to 40, I'll dial that in probably a little bit more, but also like, it's almost like I don't even have to at this point because it's such a thing that I'm used to. It's so ingrained with me. I know how good it feels. I focus on functional. For me, it's all about functional strength versus like, how much can I lift, or how many reps can I do? I do programming and phasing and all of that stuff comes so naturally to me at this point because I have so much practice. And once again, this is something that it's never too late. And man, does it go such a long way with balancing hormones, by the way, like strength training also helps to balance hormones, balance blood sugar, specifically insulin resistance. If you trend towards that kind of blood sugar dysregulation, so it goes such a long way.
Yeah, the movement piece is really, really big. It's funny. This is actually something that's been quite tough for me just because I had such an unhealthy relationship with movement and the eating disorder paired in. This is like the one area that I've very much struggled to consistently add back in, specifically when it comes to strength training, like getting back in the gym. That's the one thing that's been very, very tough for me, but it's also on my radar for this year just because, I am 32. I know that like within the next couple years, we are going to start trying to have kids and I know how much it can impact our hormones. So yeah, definitely something I want to add back in. I've been fortunate enough to feel very comfortable in my body and, working past, like, I don't necessarily want to change it anymore. I want to feel like stronger and I know the internal benefits from it. And sometimes this can be a difficult thing, especially with females and males too. We know like diet, workout culture. Megan, you've seen this firsthand from working in gyms. Like sometimes we're not always seeing like the best version of movement, why we want to move. Like there are other reasons to move than just changing your physical body. So sometimes that's something that needs to be spent, needs some time to spend working on that relationship with working out as well. But in the meantime, things like walking, stretching is certainly important, like active stretching. What's the word that you just used?
Functional strength.
Yeah, functional strength. Like, I would even go as far to say like functional stretching. Like we got to make sure we're able to move and stretch in the right places. And we can get some of this from yoga, but there's also many additional movements that we can add in besides yoga to kind of help with some of this, like how are our joints moving, you know, like what's our range of motion. So that is also a big piece to this as well.
Yeah, and this is super the mindset piece around fitness. And, you know, I have clients that I've been working with for years. You know, like probably my longest client now is like 5 or 6 years. And, you know, I have a little bit younger client who's, she's in her early 30s, and we've been working together for maybe 2.5 years at this point. And this is still something that comes up. And we talk about, you know, like, oh, my workout, I should sweat. I should, you know, I love the group classes. And look, like, I really get it. Like, trust me, before my car accident, like leading up and, you know, up until the day of my car accident, I was preparing for a bodybuilding show. And I had a coach, like I was doing all the things. I fired a coach. I figured out how to do some of this stuff on my own. And, you know, I was super into all the HIIT classes and the cardio, and I get it. Like I know, I get it. You know, food and exercise were the two things that I could control growing up, which is how many of us end up with an eating disorder or disordered eating issues. And I had to spend a lot of time with this. And this has, by the way, come up for me on several occasions of, you know, throughout the years of deeper healing of like, hey, you know, I kind of do want to do like a bodybuilding style program or a powerlifting kind of program. And I always have to check in with myself in, okay, but why? Like, what is the reasoning behind this? Where is the intention coming from? And is it coming from a healthy place of I'm looking to pursue, or I have previously enjoyed this, and, you know, that's kind of things? Or am I starting to obsess over my body image again? And I'm looking for some changes that I may not be participating in for the right reasons, in which case that will likely lead me into a flare of some sort that will set me way back. And so I think like there is a lot of mindset work that comes with this. I'm also like, I'm super sorry to burst like probably some people's bubbles here, but if you are transitioning to menopause, there is no substitute for strength training. Zero. And I'm like really throwing that out there, and I'm not sorry. And I know that's like going to be hard to hear. And it's okay if you don't agree with me. I've been doing this long enough that I've just really come to this conclusion that they're at a certain age and period of time in your life, there's no other substitute. And not saying that yoga and Pilates and group classes or cardio, like all of these things have so much value. And there is also zero replacement for traditional strength training. And by traditional strength training, I mean, you're not doing the same thing every time you go to work out. Group classes, once again, like no offense, but they're not programming you. And they don't know how to do it. And I say this as a former group instructor for many years. And this was one of the big reasons why I got out of that space, because my brain could no longer cope with seeing people who shouldn't be doing the type of working out that I was leading and encouraging at that time. And, you know, if you're using the same weights, if you're doing the same exercises, the same rep ranges, the same exercises, you know, all of these, the same tempos, like it's not going to cut it. And this is where hiring someone, just getting some additional education. I'm a big fan. There's so much free information from Mind Pump. If you're not familiar with them, they were all three of these men who lead the podcast and do a lot of the programming. There's also a fourth one who also super smart, and he's great. But, you know, these men have 20 plus years of experience each of in-person personal training. I'll also say, like, once again, like, no offense to some of these people, like, if you're working with someone who's never actively trained other people in person, the likelihood of them being a good trainer is slim to none. I've never seen one. I'm not saying that they aren't out there. So, you know, same feelings around naturopathic doctors. I've never seen a good one. and I'm sure there's one out there that is great.
Yeah.
It just makes a big difference. And I know some of the big people in the health and wellness space, and I see some of their programming, and I actively buy some of these programs because I'm curious what other people are doing in the space, and man, is it lacking. And I can tell immediately if someone has worked with someone in person or not. It is that obvious to me as someone who worked in person with people, personal training for many, many years. So I do want to throw that out there, that it does make a big difference.
Yeah, that's all very helpful info. Just especially like for me hearing, because I've been there before. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago when still maybe not working out in the best way, like there's so many programs and videos and courses that people make online that you can buy. And if you're not someone who's experienced in the industry, you don't really know what you're getting. Like you're just buying what looks and sounds appealing to you. So yeah, I think that's very valid and helpful information that will benefit anyone listening to this. And just in general, like starting off slow too with some of this stuff. Like if you're not used to strength training, try and add it in for 20 minutes, like once a week or something, just to get the ball rolling, get your body used to it. Really, this is something that you can start at any time. Anyone can do it, and it's going to be beneficial for the body.
Yeah. And look, I've started working with people when they're 80, 82.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I like, it is never too late. That also says that you don't have to go to a gym. You don't, at some point you may have to go to a gym or get some weight. But, like when you're starting off with like body weight stuff, band stuff, suspension trainer work, like all of that has so much value and can go such a long way. And you can really, especially if you're manipulating tempo with this, like, man, you can go quite some time without actually adding in like dumbbells, kettlebells, barbells, like any of that kind of stuff. Yes, I do think at some point you probably will need to. And if you're brand new, like, look, you got an advantage. The beginner results that can happen, like, super cool. And they can happen fast. And I'll tell you, someone who has a lot of experience, it takes a little bit more effort when you've been strength training really consistently for many, many years to see more of those changes. And, once again, this also depends on, for me, I do this for specific health reasons that I'm not trying to gain 50 pounds on my squat or my deadlift. And once again, I'm not saying that won't happen at some point in the future. Once again, the intention matters a lot here, but also keep that in mind. I also want to share, I also manage gyms. So I have experience in just the gym and fitness world kind of across the board. And I'll tell you that the most consistent, and this is the same for me, the people who are most consistent don't always love working out. And I fall into that category too. I do not always love going to the gym or working out. And sometimes it's a real conversation with myself of like, okay, you're tired, you're stressed, you're still gonna go. And even if it's just body weight today, just get in there, take the first step into the gym, start doing some warm-ups, some mobility work, and see how your body feels. And listen to your body, but just go. And sometimes I even set a timer for just like 20 minutes. Be like, I'm just going to go 20 minutes. And then I always stay longer for an extra like 10 minutes at least. And so I think it's important to understand, like, I don't always love working out either. I don't always love going to the gym. And yes, the gym is one of my happy places by and large. But it's discipline of like, I know this is super good for me. I know this is super valuable for me. And there's so many health benefits. I've never met anyone who's regretted a workout. I've never gone to the gym and been like, I regretted that workout. It was bad. I just, as long as I'm listening to my body, all my workouts are good because they all provide value in some form or fashion. But I think it's important to understand, like, no, you might not always love it. It may not always be the most fun thing. And that's okay. Like start making the emotional connections of like, all right, after you do work out, how do you feel? Like, how does your body feel? How do you feel physically, mentally, emotionally? And the most consistent people that I've ever talked to, that I've ever worked with in the gym, they have that emotional component of, I know this is going to make me feel good. I know the mood benefits, the cognitive benefits, the physical benefits, and I'm just going to have some discipline. And it doesn't, once again, it's not about being perfect, but it is about being consistent. And that does make a really big difference.
Yeah. And there is certainly a difference between being consistent in knowing your intention of going in the gym as opposed to completely bypassing your feelings and like just doing it to try and get the workout in, to change your body. I think the intention piece around this here is huge. Like that, even for myself right now, like that, whenever I go to do any type of movement, but besides walking my dog, because he needs that, I will ask myself, like, why are you doing this? Like, what is the goal here? What are you hoping to get out of this? And if my first immediate thought, if I catch myself, like, I want to change my body, I will not go right away. I will sit there. I need to like, hey, why is this coming up? Like, let's reframe it. Let's think about it, get to the root of it. And then I will try and go after that. But I think that's a great way to start here. Like if you're someone who has come from unhealthy movement patterns, or maybe you do have some body image issues that tie into that, that is a great place to start. It's just like start setting the intention before you go to the gym, get any movement in, and start to see like what comes up. And like Megan was saying, you also want to pay attention to how you're feeling after you leave the gym. Like if you're someone who's feeling dead tired and like you need to go to sleep, you probably pushed it a little bit too hard and need to make certain changes. If you're feeling like energized and really great after, cool. If you feel like you have great mental clarity, like those are all things that we want to try and focus on.
Yeah. And I think just two other things kind of around this, like for a lot of us, punishment, like I'm going to the gym to punish my body because it doesn't look a certain way, it doesn't feel a certain way. Like that is not a very healthy or great mindset to be going into of like, I'm just going here to punish my body, to work really hard. The other thing is, a lot of women like the HIIT classes, like the intense hot yoga classes, and do feel really good after. But I'd also encourage you to really think, am I feeling bad most of the time? This is the one time that I feel good, in which case you are getting a rush of cortisol when you're doing these very challenging workouts, and that's what feels good. And then you have a drop. It's a clear sign that you've got some really significant cortisol dysregulation, cortisol dysfunction going on, which once again, if you're going into menopause, huge red flag, like huge, because you're going to have a tough time if your adrenals are not in a great place to be able to take over some of that hormone production. So yeah, just like really keep that in mind too. Like if you sleep poorly the night after you work out too, like that's also a big red flag that it was too much, and that cortisol dysregulation is playing a big role here. As I was coming out of a lot of my big healing work, especially with like EBV, Hashimoto's, hypothyroid issues, that's one of the things that I had to be really careful of. And that was like the telltale sign that it was too much for me. And, I would try and push it, every couple weeks, like, hey, I'm feeling good. Like, I feel like I can just push my workout just a tiny bit more, just from a like, this is feeling good. I want to just like, this could also feel good. And maybe doing, an extra exercise or doing a couple extra reps or going up on weight a little bit. But if my sleep was not good that night, I knew that my that was like, nope, too much. Go back to what you were doing. That was an appropriate amount of working out and movement for you at this period of time. And whatever you did just today was too much and not good. So that's like a little bit of an easier sign sometimes for some people, that if you sleep worse on the nights that you work out, you definitely need to work on some cortisol and need to scale back a little bit.
Yeah, those are all great tips. And then one last thing here, talking about like working out and nutrition, you had mentioned the punishment aspect. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard people say like, And I don't even know if this can go punishment or just an excuse to eat crappy food. I've heard people say so many times, like, oh, like I just go to the gym and I work out for an hour every day, so it doesn't really matter how I eat. Let me tell you, that is so incredibly false. That is not how the body works. Like if you're trying to be healthy internally, what you're putting in your body as far as food and nutrition, it does matter. And we can't just change that by going to the gym and doing cardio and lifting weights. Like that is not going to fully change your internal health, and is definitely not an excuse to just like eat whatever you want all the time.
No, and this really goes both ways. That look, like one meal, one day, 1 week, it's not going to kill all the progress. And so don't be so hard on yourself. Practice a little self-compassion, self-love here. It's okay. You're totally fine. The other thing we think about, like with body transformation, I'll say weight loss is definitely like nutrition, calories. But there's also a lot of other things like sex hormones, thyroid, cortisol, like a lot of these other things play a really big role. But if you are looking to truly transform how you look, and I'll tell you, like I look drastically different than I used to. I was like super pear shaped, and I was like, like real skinny up top. And then as soon as I went through puberty, I got these big hips, and then, was like real tiny, and then, woo, like super pear, little tiny pear up top, like real big pear on the bottom. And for me, when I started to really start to change my relationship with nutrition and exercise, for me, I did want to transform, and I wanted my upper body felt so weak compared to my lower body. I spent many years trying to build up, like muscles in my back and my arms and my shoulders. And while I'm still like largely pear shaped, like it looks totally different. I mean, my arms used to be like not much bigger than my wrists. And now, I mean, I can't, and this is largely muscle, going on here. So like, but that took a lot of effort, by the way. Like it took me like 2 years to build a bicep of any sort, with like really actively trying to build up some biceps here. So when we think about body transformation, and changing the way you look and looking like sculpt or toned or, whatever hot phrase you want to use, this is really about building muscle, by the way, and then losing body fat. That's how we look leaner. That's how we look, quote unquote, more toned. This is what this looks like. It's not an overnight process. It's also not super easy. If you ever work with like a really solid nutrition coach and you've been a chronic dieter and punishment working out kind of person, they're going to tell you that, hey, like we need a reverse diet for probably 6 to 12 months at least, where we just got to build up some muscle, and start to really build a foundation before we even think about like cutting body fat and like going into caloric deficit and anything like that. And yeah, that makes a big difference. And that, so if you are looking for like more body transformation, like once again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it is a lot about the intention and understanding that, calories in, calories out. Yes, of course that matters. And at a baseline, like you can only get so low. Like should really anyone be under like 1,500 calories? No. Should anyone really be at 1,500 calories? Also probably not. You probably need more calories than you think just to get in like baseline nutrients and have the energy to like live a life. And, like some people, yeah, will gain weight on, 17, 18, 1,900 calories. And if you want a little bit more metabolic flexibility with that, having that baseline muscle, once again, goes a super, super long way. And once again, the intention behind this is also super important. So, if body transform, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to transform your body and have it look different. And if we're using that as a form of punishment, I don't also think that's the best. And not healthy at all. And really it's looking at all of this all together and how can we support and love our body in the most authentic way possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like just a couple of things that you said that I wanted to touch on here too. Like most females that we meet with are actually not consuming enough food or like over exercising along with that. So specifically, when it comes to, like wanting to get pregnant in particular, or even like getting ready to go through menopause, like it is super important that we make sure we're actually getting enough calories in our body to help fuel us. And then if we add in that movement piece, again, like we have to make sure we're getting in enough food, getting in all of our nutrients that we need. Oftentimes we do need to add supplements in with that because it's very difficult to get all the nutrients we need just solely from food. Like these are also pieces to think about.
Yeah, of course. And all of this, corresponds and relates to each other so much. The other thing I just want to touch on with like preparing for menopause, and this, goes right back to trying to eat as well, of liver support. The liver does so much. The more we can support the liver and the natural filtration process, the liver also does some work with blood sugar regulation. All of that makes such a big difference. So liver support is still like a fundamental piece of my life and will be probably forever at this point in time, because I know it does make such a big difference. The other thing is just, once again, like the mindfulness piece of, going through a big transition of any sort, whether that's having a child or going through menopause, is very stressful. And so if our baseline stress is already low, if we think about this like cortisol bucket, or stress bucket that we've talked about so many times, like the more space you have in that bucket, the less likely you are to go to an extreme piece. And so supporting the body, regulating that nervous system even more, like, man, does that go such a long way in any of these big transitions. So, once again, like for me, thinking about menopause, like just the stress management piece of how can I make sure that my body is supported from a stress standpoint inside and out, and how do I give myself as much room within that bucket so that when the time does come and stress naturally goes up, because it is a stressful process. How do I make sure I have enough wiggle room that my body is supported and isn't going to go, kind of haywire and experience all of the things that many people in menopause experience.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the whole point too, is if we can really get a handle on some of this mindfulness stuff, like we know we're going to be exposed to stress, on, that's just part of life that happens. But if we're not, we want to make sure we're not at the top of that bucket already and it's putting us over the edge. Like if we have that little bit of wiggle room in there to handle some stress, we're going to be able to come out of it easier and help kind of rebalance our body out and get into a better place with that. And when, talking about like stress in the liver, one other thing that I wanted to mention here that goes for both of these things, for trying to conceive and preparing for menopause, we also want to try and reduce our amount of environmental toxins that we're exposed to that we have control over, because this is something else that stresses the body, can stress the liver. So, we can get really deep into this, but in general, like hygiene products, cleaning products that we're using in the house, especially for females and males, like non-toxic underwear is also a really big thing. Non-toxic clothing, like just starting to eliminate our exposure to toxins where we have control over it. I'm thinking about like air filters as well. That's another huge thing, is like air quality, water quality. These are some of the ways that we can help our body just be less stressed from toxins.
Yeah, super great point. And once again, I mean, we've spent many years, both of us, swapping products and transitioning things and cookware and all this kind of stuff to make sure we are living a lower tox life kind of thing. I don't think there's once again, there's no perfect here of you're never going to escape all of the toxins unless you're like in the have your own farm, cook all your own food and grow all your own food and meat and all that kind of stuff. So once again, and this is where the liver support can also come into a lot of play, of just like supporting the body naturally getting these things out that should not be there. The other thing that I did want to talk about here briefly is birth control. A lot of people are on birth control, like trying not to get pregnant, and then they come off thinking that they're just going to get pregnant right away. Same thing, we've seen a lot of women, be put back on birth control even after having kids, because they have period problems, hormone imbalance of some sort. In Western medicine, that's the only answer. Right. And then when they come off in preparation for perimenopause, or they reach a certain age, like, oh, it can get really, really rough. So and once again, like, this is a very personal decision to come off of birth control, but keeping in mind that birth control is also a stressor. Even if you are doing a non-hormonal form, anything inside of your body is a foreign object inside your body, and you might be surprised at how it's impacting you. For me, like, when I got my IUD out, my lower belly bloat that I literally could not get to go away went away almost instantly. And it was because my body just didn't like having this foreign object in there, and it was, bloating as a result of that. And I think just keeping that in mind, that we can really prep our hormones going into either and both stages here of these, and coming off of birth control can be a part of this. Really important, really valuable, understanding the nutrient deficiencies that often come with these various forms of birth control. And then, once again, this is where lab testing can really help us out in understanding, okay, well, what's going on with my body? Where are some nutrient deficiencies? Where are some imbalances coming into play? And then, of course, liver support, and filtering out any excess hormones that are kind of coming into play here.
Yeah, definitely. Funny that you brought that up. I was actually talking with a friend about that today who just stopped birth control. And, we were talking about cycles and tracking and all the things. And I had just mentioned to her, if you are someone who just stopped birth control for whatever reason, expect to give yourself a couple months. If things naturally level out, you might need some additional support, like this nutrient balancing, seeing if there's anything else going on. It's not uncommon when you stop birth control to see some shifts and changes for a couple months while your body is naturally trying to process out these imbalances, these toxins that came with it. And also just throwing it out there too, because I have seen this happen. I do not recommend trying to jump into naturally tracking your cycles right away after you stop birth control, because they will change. It's going to take time. And if you're someone who does not want to get pregnant, that is not a time to rely on that. You got to give your body a chance to level out.
Yeah. And, for me coming off of birth control, so I was on birth control for about 16 years for reference. And I had started it originally because I was getting my period every other week. And then, I was really afraid to stop because I didn't want to get pregnant. And so, I had already done about 2 years worth of work coming off of birth control, which, man, that went such a long way because it was a pretty easy transition off. My first cycle, it took about 6 weeks to get. And then I was, super regular, pretty quickly. But also, once again, I spent about 2 years doing some really deep work in preparation to come off of that pretty quickly. So I, just really keep that in mind. I'd also say, definitely have different protection mechanisms. Condoms came back into play, in that period of time until I had for me, it was 3 cycles in a row that were really consistently normal. And I was using a variety of tracking mechanisms to really confirm that, because I really wanted to learn, because I had my period for just a couple of years before I went on birth control, and it wasn't super normal then. I also think it's really important to start to understand and start to learn your natural cycles. And there's a lot of value in that of we have our period and we, our body's releasing things. We might feel a little bit of fatigue. And we talked about this on our menstruating women episode of then we have a period of a higher estrogen where you might feel better. You might feel stronger, energy, mood, sleep might be better. And then you ovulate, and then we're at the peak there. And then we come down a little bit. You might be a little less, little less energized, little less super on top of it cognitively, and heart rate's going to be a little bit higher, body temp's going to be a little bit higher. By the way, all of that's normal, and that's the phases that we naturally go through, as much as we may not like it. that is how we work. And that's how, we have to learn that and accept it. And once again, like show ourselves some compassion if we're a little extra tired, a couple days leading up to our period. And this doesn't excuse, like, you should be like, feel like you're manic or crazy leading up to your cycle. Just by the way, like, just saying, like, you might not feel as sharp as you did right around ovulation. And it should be minor, but if you're in tune with your body, you will notice a difference. So just like keeping that in mind and just being aware of like, yeah, like no one teaches us this. Like, I don't know about, most people, but like I never learned, I was given a book, like a body book. And that was like my whole, and I took like a sex class, I think in like 5th or 6th grade where they just talked about your period. Nothing relevant, obviously. They don't teach us real things, but just keeping in mind, like get some education around like, what is happening to your body at different phases and different cycles, and what does that look like? And just understanding your body can help show yourself a little bit more love and compassion as you go through all of these stages.
Yeah, definitely. And then one more small thing to add to this too is coming from the other direction. Like if you are a person who's trying to conceive and you're on birth control, you're getting off birth control, like kind of some of the same things apply here. Like, again, you would want to give your body a little bit of time to process it out. This would be a great point to get some testing done and see like what nutrients am I missing? What's my mineral balance looking like? If there's no like major other root issues going on here. But same thing, like if you're trying to conceive, you're stopping birth control, like again, there's going to be that period where you have to give your body some extra support to kind of rebalance out again to make sure you are in a good place to actually try and conceive.
Yeah, and then just one little point on testing here. Like if you're on birth control, hormone testing is not accurate. Just like pretty easy blanket statement there. And if you are coming off and looking to do some hormone testing, about 3 months is typically a good time frame. If you're in a hurry, if you can wait 6 months, that may be even a little bit better depending on the person. But I would say waiting at least 3 months before getting any specific hormone testing can go a really, really, really long way. And once again, like this education piece, like most physicians, I know we've both been told like, oh, you get a period, your hormones are normal. Like, no, please do some testing. Remember, blood testing is not super accurate. Urine or saliva is going to be way more accurate when it comes to sex hormones, specifically. And the other thing too, and I know we're getting long here, but there's a lot of things that impact our hormones, and so keeping that in mind of like, let's not just look at hormones. Even if you're trying to conceive, like let's look at all the things that also impact hormones. And this is where like we get back into like the root cause healing piece of a lot of people will symptom manage you even in the holistic health space, even for hormones. And so just like really keep that in mind. Also, if you're ever working with someone who is putting you on anything to manipulate hormones and they've not done really specific good testing, please run far, 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 far away.
Yes. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. Like, if you were someone who's struggled with hormone imbalances for a long time, like you have to look further underneath and certainly address that. If you really want to come at menopause, trying to conceive, like whatever it may be, if you want to do that properly, you have to find if there's anything at the root that's causing these imbalances. It's not just getting off of birth control and whatnot. But yeah, it's very symptom managed in the holistic health space. I've been there, Megan, I'm pretty sure you've been there as well. Like this, it just tends to be a deeper thing most of the time.
Yeah. Just if anyone's recommending DIM to you just for your quote unquote high estrogen symptoms, just like I see that all the time in my fitness groups, and I like want to rip my eyeballs out every time because I'm like, don't do that. It's not estrogen. And also because I've been hurt by that too. Like that happened to me. I was put on DIM and proper hormone testing was not done before that, and it did very much impact my cycles. So just like all things to keep in mind, like hormones are not something to mess with. Please, if you are going to work with someone who is very well educated in this subject.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are definitely some good practitioners out there, but basically, like, you just want to make sure you're getting some accurate testing in before you start randomly taking supplements is what we're getting at here, and looking at all of these pieces that we talked about during this episode, like, what does your toxin exposure look like, especially in your household, maybe at work? How's your stress levels? What are you doing for mindfulness work, if anything? What does your sleep look like? Nutrition. It's really important to look at this whole picture here, like literally everything that we talked about.
Yeah, for sure. So, anything else you want to add in here real quick?
No, I think we covered everything that I wanted to talk about.
Okay, great. So just some education, a lot of personal stuff that we're thinking about and just come top of mind to us as we're both preparing for these phases in our lives. And also, we work with a lot of women on both ends of the spectrum. So we're very aware of what this can look like and how we can support the body to have the easiest time through a lot of these big transitionary periods that, as women, we're all going to go through menopause. Not everyone wants to have a child, but everyone's going to go through menopause. So, just a lot of things to think about. And don't put too much pressure on yourself. If you're not doing any of these things, start with one and go from there. Start slow. You can always build up. It's not a race. You got some time here. So thank you for listening. As always, like, subscribe, follow if it resonates. Any 5-star reviews really mean the world to us. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.